Uveth. I am a Jashari, which means my memory is biological and total and not something I chose. The Galactic Convocation assigned my species to witness function 400 years ago because we cannot forget, and because we have never in our recorded history expressed a preference. We are the perfect record keepers. We do not care what we write down. We write it all. I have filed 2,204,847 documents in service of the Convocation. I have attended 1,104 formal sessions. I have recorded the Exile declarations of 9 species, the absorption treaties of 11, and the quiet deaths of 3 more who had no one left to sign anything. I have never editorialized. I have never withheld. I have never kept a single item for myself. The Exile Declaration for Humanity was filed on Standard Day 7303.86. The vote was 1,847 to 0. Ambassador Sable Ren was the respondent. She stood at the anchor point, the fixed floor position where respondents are required to stand, lit from above, looking upward at 1,847 occupied seats at a 73-degree angle, and she listened to the full reading without moving. When it concluded, she looked at the ceiling for approximately 3 seconds. Then she looked at Grand Executor San of the Krethali Mandate. Then she smiled. I have reviewed the footage of that smile 14 times. I have no category for it. She set something on the ledge of the anchor point when the session ended. A small card, plain white, folded once, slightly worn at the fold. The handwriting on it did not belong to her. I cataloged it as debris. I assigned it an administrative disposal code. I moved on to the next item in the session record. I was wrong about what it was. The part I could not classify, the part I still cannot, comes next. Stay close. 28 years before the vote, the Ren Anchorage smelled of recycled air and old solder. That is not a poetic description. That is the chemical reality of a decommissioned listening platform running on a recycled atmosphere system that had not been replaced in 11 years, staffed by people who had been aboard long enough that they stopped noticing it. The smell was recycled air and old solder, and on the upper deck where the archive cold storage units ran constantly, something close to the inside of a refrigeration unit, dry and faintly electric. Uveth had never been aboard the Anchorage. He is describing it now from footage and from the accounts of 3 crew members who consented to interview. But he notes that the smell appears in every account, always first. It is the thing everyone remembers. The mess hall on the lower deck had a mural. Someone had painted the coastlines of a planet called Earth across one entire wall, the curves and inlets and the long flat stretches of beach, in 3 colors of paint that had been slightly wrong from the start, because the person who painted it had never seen Earth. They had worked from photographs. The blues were a little too dark. The sand was a little too yellow. It was accurate in the way that a record is accurate. All the correct information, and still not quite the thing itself. The chairs at the mess table had worn to the shape of the people who sat in them. 28 years of the same 7 people in the same 7 chairs, every morning, meant that the padding had compressed and shifted until each seat fit its occupant the way a long-used tool fits a hand. When Pell reviewed the mess footage, he could identify each crew member by the depression in their chair before they sat down. No protest had been filed from the Anchorage in 28 years. No territorial claim, no weapons, none that the Convocation's registry would have recognized as weapons. From the outside, the Ren Anchorage looked like what it was listed as: a decommissioned monitoring station, minimal crew, archival function, low resource draw. The Krethali Mandate had reviewed its operating license 3 times in the prior decade and renewed it without comment each time. They had never asked what was being archived. Ambassador Sable Ren made tea every morning in a ceramic mug, plain, no markings, no insignia. She held it with both hands. This detail appears in 9 separate crew accounts and in 17 hours of mess footage, always with the same specificity. Both hands, mug near chest height, not quite at her lips. Her team knew from long experience that this was when she was most dangerous. Not angry, not tense, just very still in the particular way of someone who has already decided something and is now waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. She had been posted to 4 disputed corridors before the Anchorage. She had mediated the Velhari-Osru border standoff in 2074, resolved the Thenic Resource Agreement dispute in 2078, and spent 3 years in the Drevani Outer Corridor during the period when the Krethali Mandate was quietly reclassifying Drevani territorial waters as mandate transit lanes. She had never once raised her voice in a recorded session. Pell has reviewed every recording. He confirms this. In the 4th year of the Anchorage posting, she had told her team, "We are not here to argue. We are here to finish the sentence. When the sentence is finished, we will speak." No one had asked what the sentence was. They were already writing it. The archive did not look like what it was. This was intentional. The 3.6 million entries in the Ren Anchorage's main system were organized in a commercial freight manifest format, the kind used for bulk transit cargo, not for intelligence or legal documentation. The system had been built to look like a routine operational database. Entry headers used shipping terminology. Categories were labeled as cargo classes. Someone reviewing the manifest from the outside would see a long, dull list of freight records for a decommissioned station. The entries were not freight records. Each one was a documented interaction between humanity and a convocation member species. Every request, every response, every communication that had passed between the Ren team and any of the 12 species, the Krethali Mandate classified as cooperative dependencies. 32 years of contact, cross-referenced by date, species, subject matter, and where available, a corresponding convocation session record. There were 3.6 million of them. Dr. Essa Corvin was responsible for the legal framework. She was 68 years old, which meant she had spent more than a third of her life on the Anchorage. She kept a physical clipboard, actual pressed material, not a display surface, with a running annotation of every clause in the convocation's founding charter. The annotation had been growing for 22 years. The handwriting had gotten smaller as the pages filled, because she had not planned for how much there would be. She had found Article 7, Clause 3 6 years before the vote. She had not told anyone outside the team. The clause was not complicated. It said that any exile declaration issued by the convocation was subject to re-examination if evidence of convocation member misconduct was presented within 90 standard days of the declaration's formal issuance. The clause required floor-level presentation rights for the respondent species during the re-examination session. It required the convocation's own record-keeping apparatus to participate in any evidentiary cross-reference. The Krethali Mandate had written the clause 190 years ago. It had been included as a procedural formality, the kind of language that gets drafted into founding charters to satisfy the smaller blocks and is then never applied because the smaller blocks never have evidence of anything, and the larger blocks make sure of it. The Mandate had not read their own charter recently. This would become relevant. On the morning of Standard Day 7217, Essa Corvin set her clipboard on the mess table and said, "The vote will be soon. When it comes, we let it go. No protest, no counterpetition, no appeal before the verdict. We let them finish." Ren held her mug with both hands. She said, "Day 90 lands on Standard 7393. We have time." Essa wrote something at the bottom of the current clipboard page. The handwriting was very small. There were others. Pelyuveth notes that he knew their names before the session. They had all filed convocation-adjacent documentation at some point, but he had never thought about them as connected. That was, he understands now, the point. The comms specialist went by Tacit, which was not his given name. He was 31 years old and had spent 3 years before the Anchorage posting working with Osru diplomatic relays, learning to encode messages in pressure wave pulse sequences. The communication method the Osru used internally, which the Krethali Mandate had never bothered to learn because it was slow and required specialized equipment, and the Osru were classified as a cooperative dependency, which meant their internal communications were considered low priority. Tacit could relay information to Osru community consensus groups without the messages appearing in standard convocation intercept logs. He never spoke above a murmur. The team called him Tacit 3 months into the posting, and the name stayed. Save was Drevani, avian descended, 40 kilograms, with ceremonial plumage along her collar and shoulders that shifted color with her emotional state in ways she could not entirely control. She had arrived at the Anchorage 11 years prior, after the Krathali Mandate's administrative division had quietly deleted her government's entry from the Convocation Species Registry. Not the species, just the registry entry. A clerical correction. The Mandate's office had described it as. Save had noticed the deletion within 6 hours, because her species, archive reverent by culture, which meant being recorded was a form of being honored, had been checking their registry entry monthly for 40 years. She had contacted the nearest human diplomatic station. Ren had responded within the day. Save had been cross-referencing Drevani oral history with Ren's documentation ever since. 11 years of work, combining the living recitation tradition of her species. Every law, every agreement, every treaty spoken aloud and committed to memory across generations. With the written record the Anchorage had been building, the combination produced something neither record could produce alone, a trail of events that had both a spoken witness and a written timestamp, neither of which the Mandate had thought to manage, because they were managing two separate systems and had not considered that someone might combine them. Pris Vale was not in the mess hall that morning. She was in the holdfast. The holdfast was a hollowed comet, naturally occurring, 3 AU from the Convocation nave, used by the Ren team as a relay cache and secondary archive for 28 years. Its interior had been converted to cold storage and a small crew station. 2 archivists maintained it on a rotating schedule. Pris was 34 years old, the granddaughter of one of the original holdfast volunteers. She had been on rotation for 16 months. Her team had been due for rotation 2 months ago, but the timing of the vote had locked everything in place. You didn't pull people from a post you might need in the next 30 days. She did not know from inside the comet that the vote had happened yet. The index card appeared in Pell's record on standard day 7303.86, the day of the Exile vote, at 14:32 nave time. He catalogued it at 14:47, Administrative Disposal Code A7, which covers non-documentary material left at the respondent anchor point. He reviewed the footage 3 days later, for reasons he describes in his record as procedural verification of disposal categorization. He does not note why he reviewed it at all. The disposal code was standard. There was no procedural reason to verify it. He watched the footage of Ambassador Ren setting the card on the ledge. She had not made a statement with it. She had not displayed it to the chamber. She had simply set it down at the end of the session, as though it needed to be somewhere it could be found. Her back had been to the seats. The gesture was not recorded by any of the chamber's public feeds. Pell's witness function feed, the narrow-angle recording made automatically from his filing position, had caught it from the side. He watched it 11 times before he wrote a single note. The note said, "The fold shows prior handling. The card was opened and closed repeatedly before this session. The wear pattern indicates many openings, not one." He did not revise the disposal code. He did not retrieve the card. He filed his note under the same administrative entry and moved to the next record. He is aware, in retrospect, that he was already doing something other than filing. The convocation reconvened on standard day 7389. San had framed it as a compliance hearing, the formal procedural session before Exile enforcement began, an administrative formality. The Mandate's communication to the session roster described it as a processing session, expected duration 90 minutes, no substantive motions anticipated. Every seat was filled. Pell noted this. Full attendance was not common for processing sessions. Ambassador Ren arrived at the anchor point at 09:00 nave time. She did not descend into the respondent pit. The respondent pit is the recessed area below the anchor point floor level, where respondents without convocation standing are required to position themselves. A further 2.4 meters below the floor, requiring an upward angle of 81 degrees to see seated delegates. Ren stood at floor level. This was a procedural violation. Pell noted it. He reached for his filing stylus. He did not file it. His secondary eyelids did not close. He was not processing anything unusual. He had simply, and he will not offer an explanation for this, not filed it. Grand Executor San was the first to speak. He moved from his orbital altitude of 94 meters, the highest fixed position in the nave, to have the respondent removed to the appropriate floor position. His voice was large and flat, built for declaration rather than conversation, and it filled the lower chamber the way machinery fills a space, completely, without residual. Ren set a single document on the anchor point reader. She said, "We are within the 90-day window. Article 7, Clause 3 of the Founding Charter gives the respondent species floor-level presentation rights during re-examination. We are requesting re-examination. You wrote the clause. I have the original draft in our archive, with your predecessor's signature." She did not raise her voice. She did not look up at San. She looked at the document on the reader. The chamber was quiet for 2 seconds. San called for a procedural ruling. The Jeshari filing office was asked to confirm. Pelyuveth was asked to confirm. He had not expected to be asked. In 400 years of witness duty, no one had ever asked him to confirm a charter clause. His function was to record, not to verify. The clause existed in his biological memory. All convocation documents did, but he had never been required to access it in a formal ruling context. His secondary eyelids closed. From the outside in, which is how they always close, translucent membrane, beginning at the outer edge, moving inward. He was processing something he had no prior category for. He said, Article 7, Clause 3 exists as stated. The 90-day window is active. The respondent's floor-level position is within charter provision. He opened his eyelids. He looked at Ambassador Ren. She had not moved. She was holding her mug. She had brought it from the Anchorage, plain ceramic, no markings, with both hands. Her face was the same as it had been in the Exile session footage, unhurried, as though she had already arrived wherever this was going and was waiting for the room to get there. He still could not classify the smile, but he was beginning to understand that the smile was not the point. The mandate's second move came within 3 minutes. The procedural block, 9 species that had voted consistently with Krethali interests for the prior 40 years, submitted a joint motion. The human archive should be declared inadmissible as primary evidence on the grounds that it was a non-convocation source. Only convocation-generated or convocation-ratified documentation could be entered as primary evidence in a re-examination hearing. This was not incorrect. That rule existed. Ren said, "We agree." A pause. One mandate block representative's orbital rotation stuttered, a mechanical adjustment that Pell's witness register logged as involuntary, indicating a surprise input to the altitude control system. "We are not entering our archive as primary evidence," Ren continued. "We are requesting that the convocation's own record witness species cross-reference our archive against their 400 years of convocation proceedings. The cross-referenced finding would be convocation-sourced. It would be admissible." She looked at Pell. In the mess hall footage from the Anchorage, Pell had seen her hold her mug before every significant moment in a session. He had noted it as a behavioral pattern, hands on ceramic, slight stillness, then a statement. He had not known then what he was looking at. He knew now. "We are told," she said, "that the Jashari have never been asked to testify. We are asking." The chamber was very quiet. The Jashari had been assigned to the convocation as neutral witnesses 400 years ago. In that time, they had attended every session. They had filed every record. They had been, in every practical sense, the memory of the institution, its archive, its continuity, its proof that things had happened the way it said they had happened. No one had ever asked them to say what they had seen. They had no protocol for refusal. They had only ever been assigned to witness. They had never been given something to witness that they were also required to adjudicate. Pell's function was observation and record. Testimony was a different thing. Testimony meant choice. His secondary eyelids closed for the second time. She was still looking at him. He looked back at her. He looked at her mug. He looked at the anchor point ledge where, 86 days ago, she had set a small folded card that he had logged as debris, the longest pause of his 4-century career. Then he said, "The Jashari will cross-reference." The mandate's third move came before Pell had finished entering his agreement into the record. A block motion to limit the scope of the cross-reference. The Jashari examination should be restricted to documentation from the current convocation session period only. 4 standard years. This was framed as a practical limitation. A full 400-year cross-reference would be unmanageable, would delay proceedings, was unnecessary for the purposes of the current re-examination. Dr. Essa Corvin stepped forward. She was permitted to do this. Under Article 7, Clause 3, the same clause Ren had cited, the respondent species was allowed advisory council at floor level. Essa had been listed as advisory counsel on the re-examination filing. She was 68 years old, and she had been adding to her clipboard for 22 years, and she walked with the particular steadiness of someone who has been waiting a long time to say a specific thing. She opened the clipboard to the last page. The handwriting at the bottom was very small. She read, Article 7, Clause 3, as written in the founding charter, specifies full evidentiary scope in the cross-reference provision. That language was present in the original draft. We have the original draft. The scope limitation motion has no charter basis. She closed the clipboard. She did not look at San. She looked at the text she had just read for a moment, as though confirming it was still there. Grand Executor San said nothing. 8 seconds. Pell Uveth, who had attended 1,104 formal sessions over 400 years, noted this in his record as follows. The first observed instance of a Grand Executor silence exceeding 2 seconds in a formal proceeding. He wrote it in the same flat tone he wrote everything, because that was his function, and because he did not yet have the vocabulary for what the silence meant. He was beginning to develop it. The scope limitation motion failed. The cross-reference would be full and unrestricted. San had said nothing for 8 seconds, and then he had simply stopped moving the motion forward. He had not withdrawn it formally. He had simply gone still, the way a large mechanism goes still when something critical has been removed from its operation, and the absence of that thing has not yet registered as a failure. Ren did not watch him. She had set her mug on the anchor point ledge, next to the space where the card had been, and she was looking at her hands. Just for a moment, the way a person looks at their hands when something they have been holding for a very long time has finally been put down, except the holding was not yet over. Not quite. The mandate's block representative was a species called the Veth, bilateral, pale carapace, who had held Crethali patronage for 60 years, and had learned to speak in the mandate's declarative register so thoroughly that Pell had, on 3 prior occasions, misattributed their session contributions to Crethali speakers in his initial notes. The representative addressed Pell directly. He did not address Ren. He did not address the chamber. He looked at Pell's filing position, a fixed station at the nave's east wall, neutral ground by 400 years of convention, and he spoke toward it the way someone speaks toward a tool they are reminding of its function. The Jashari filing designation, he said, was mandate administered. The transit corridor that connected the Jashari home system to the convocation nave, the corridor that allowed Pell's species to fulfill their witness function, was maintained under mandate infrastructure agreements. The Jasharis recognized status as neutral witnesses, the protection that status gave them, the operational budget that kept their filing atrium running. All of it existed within the framework of mandate institutional support. He did not say, withdraw your agreement to cross-reference. He did not need to. The chamber waited. Pell Uveth set down his filing stylus. He had been holding it since the session began. 400 years of habit, the stylus always in hand during a session, the physical weight of it a kind of anchor. He set it on his station ledge. He looked at the Veth representative. He said, the Jashari are neutral witnesses. Neutrality means we record what is true. What is true is not administered by anyone's budget. His secondary eyelids did not close. He was not processing something new. He understood as he said it, already decided this before he entered the chamber, possibly before he reviewed the Exile session footage for the 14th time, possibly before the first time. He picked up his stylus and began filing the Veth representative's statement. The representative did not respond. His orbital altitude held steady. His carapace plates made no adjustment. They were the equivalent of Krethali jaw plates, status signaling structures, and they did not shift. San, from his altitude of 94 meters, said nothing. Ren had not moved. She was holding her mug again. The cross-reference took 9 days. Pell does not describe the 9 days in detail in his official record, because his official record covers session proceedings, not the work performed between sessions. But he notes, in a personal addendum that he added to his biological memory, and which he has since dictated for this account, that the 9 days were the first time in his career that he had looked at the convocation's own files with the specific intention of finding something. He had always looked to record, never to find. The difference was larger than he had expected. The Jashari filing archive contained records of every formal convocation proceeding across 400 years, session minutes, vote records, treaty ratifications, absorption agreements, the full text of every statement entered into formal proceedings by every species that had held a convocation seat, all of it encoded in the biological memory of every active Jashari witness, cross-indexed by date, species, session number, and subject classification. The human archive contained 3.6 million entries. Where the two records covered the same events, Pell compared them. He found 2,847 points of discrepancy. Each discrepancy followed the same pattern. The convocation record showed a voluntary agreement, a dependent species formally accepting a mandate resource arrangement, a border reclassification, a governance transfer. The human archive contained the original communication from that species, sent before the agreement was recorded, in which the species had explicitly declined. In many cases, the human archive contained follow-up communications from the species asking why their declination had not been acknowledged. The follow-up communications did not appear in the convocation record. Pell's archive also contained them, filed neutrally under the session dates to which they corresponded, never examined because no one had asked him to examine them. They had been in his memory for decades, some for over a century, indexed and waiting and entirely invisible because the function of a witness is to hold, not to look. He had been holding evidence of institutional fraud for 160 years, without knowing it. His secondary eyelids closed for a long time when he understood this. Long enough that the filing station's presence sensor flagged an idle period and sent him a query. He dismissed it. He sat with his eyelids closed and the weight of 160 years in his memory and thought about what it means to be a perfect record and a perfect failure at the same time. Then he opened his eyelids and finished the cross-reference. The convocation reconvened on standard day, 7,398. Full attendance again. The same 1,847 seats. The same orbital altitudes, sorted by 190 years of mandate procedure, with the lowest-ranking species. The 12 cooperative dependencies, present as observers in the gallery, no altitude assigned, standing at chamber floor level behind a boundary marker. They had not been permitted to attend the first session. Article 7, Clause 3 gave them observer access to the re-examination. The mandate had not challenged this. There were several things the mandate was no longer challenging. Pell adjusted his filing stylus before he stood to present. He had done this before every filing in 400 years. The stylus in his right hand, a small adjustment of grip, a press of the index pad against the barrel, a habit so old it had stopped being a habit and had become simply part of the motion of beginning. He adjusted it now before testimony. Before the first time in his career that he was not going to read a record but going to say what he had seen. He stood. He said, "The Jashari cross-reference is complete. I will present the finding." No one moved. 2,847 instances. The convocation session record contains an outcome that does not match the record held by this filing office. In each case, the convocation record describes a voluntary agreement. In each case, the Jashari record, filed at the time of the original session, never previously examined, contains the prior communication in which the affected species declined. The convocation's own record contains the discrepancy. I am not offering an interpretation. I am reading the file. 2847. The number sat in the chamber the way a weight sits on a surface. It didn't move anything by itself, but everything around it was now aware of it. A athenic collective pressure suit in the gallery made a sound, not language. Just a shift in the internal pressure cycling, the equivalent of a sharp breath. Pell filed it. Grand Executor San said, "The cross-reference covers events across multiple session periods. Many of those records predate the current mandate administration. Historical discrepancies cannot be attributed to current." Ren said, "The most recent discrepancy is dated standard year 7299. That is 4 years ago." San stopped. Ren did not continue. She did not press it. She let the number 7299 exist in the record and moved forward. She said, "We are not asking the chamber to accept our account." She said, "We are telling you that every entry in our index is retrievable, verifiable, and cross-confirmed by the convocation's own neutral witnesses." She placed the index on the anchor point reader. 3.6 million entries. Every date, every species, every communication. 2,847 of them now carrying a Jashari confirmation code, Pell's code, his biological filing signature, the mark that made the entry's convocation admissible. "Grand Executor San," she said, "you may request any file, we will wait. No protest, no argument, no demand." She held her mug with both hands. The chamber did not request a file. 14 seconds. Pell counted them. He filed them as a session pause. He noted the duration. He noted that no one spoke and no one moved and no one looked away from the reader displaying the index, and that this, the silence of 1,847 species confronted with 3.6 million entries they could request, and had chosen not to, was the loudest thing he had recorded in 400 years of proceedings. The Velhari delegate found entry 1,204,771 herself. Not during the formal session. 15 minutes after the index went live on the chamber reader, when delegates had been given access to browse. A standard re-examination provision. Any delegate could query the presented evidence. She found it. Entry 1,204,771. A communication from the Velhari Oral Council, sent to the Krethali Mandate Administrative Office in standard year 7112. In it, the Council formally declined the mandate's proposed reclassification of the Velhari Inner Corridor as a cooperative transit zone. The communication was clear, specific, signed by 7 council members. The Velhari had said no. The convocation record from standard year 7112 showed the reclassification approved by Velhari consent. Below entry 1,204,771 was a deletion log. The mandate's administrative system had flagged the original communication as a processing error and removed it from the forwarded file before it reached the convocation session record. The deletion had a timestamp. It had an operator code. The human archive had captured both. The Velhari delegate read the deletion log. She read the timestamp. She read the operator code. She was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke in oral preservation register, the formal recitation tone her species used for records that had to be held, not just heard. The tone that meant, this is going into memory, this is going to be carried forward, this is not going to be something that gets lost. She said the name of the mandate official who had ordered the deletion. She said it slowly. She said it once. That was the only outburst. Pell filed it verbatim, every syllable of the name, the register she used, the duration of the silence before and after. He filed it the way he filed everything because that was what he was for, and because this was the most important thing he had ever been for. Ren did not watch the chamber. She held her mug with both hands. She looked at the index card. She had taken it from her pocket when she sat down, and it was on the ledge of the anchor point reader next to the display showing the index. The fold was more worn than it had been 86 days ago. Someone had returned it to her between sessions. She did not know who. She had not asked. She thought about the woman who had written it, the first human posted to the convocation. She had arrived 28 years before the Exile vote, when humanity had been in the convocation for less than a decade, and no one had yet decided they were worth paying attention to. She had set up the filing system. She had built the freight manifest format, chosen deliberately so that the archive would not look like an archive. She had trained the first rotation of archivists. She had written the protocols that Ren's team had followed for 3 decades. She had died 11 years before the vote, a pressure seal failure, not the one that took 2 of the holdfast archivists later, a different one, earlier. She had not seen what the records became. She had not seen 28 years of filing turned into 3.6 million entries. She had not seen ESA find Article 7, Clause 3. She had not seen the index go live. She had written one sentence on a card and folded it once and told the next archivist, "This is what we are doing, make sure it continues." The chamber voted, while Ren was still thinking about her. It was not a declaration, no speeches, no dramatic pause before the tally was announced. The re-examination motion passed. The Exile Declaration was suspended pending full review. The 12 dependent species were granted provisional observer standing, not full membership, but chairs at floor level, at the altitude of the anchor point, where they could be heard. The Jashari cross-reference findings were entered into the permanent convocation record. Grand Executor San's authority was referred to an Article 7 review panel. He would not address the chamber again. The whole thing took 11 minutes. From the moment the index went live to the moment the final motion passed, 11 minutes. 28 years of work, 3.6 million entries, 124 people, 11 minutes. Ren did not feel triumph. She felt the particular exhaustion of something held for a very long time, finally set down. Not relief exactly, not joy, the specific weight of a thing that is over. She picked up the index card, she put it in her pocket, she picked up her mug. She walked up the steps. No one stopped her. No one called a procedural violation. The steps were 47 of them, the same 47 she had walked down 86 days ago to stand at the respondent position, and she walked up them now in the same unhurried way, as though she had already arrived wherever she was going. Essa Corvin was at the top, clipboard in hand, one new notation at the very bottom, in writing so small it would need magnification to read. She had been adding to that clipboard for 22 years. She had written the last note in the smallest hand she had yet used, as though she was trying to fit the end of something into the space available without changing the size of the thing that held it. She did not say anything. Neither did Ren. They walked down the nave's outer corridor together, and the sound of their footsteps was the only thing in the record for that stretch. Pell watched them go. He reached for his filing stylus. He held it for a moment. He was not sure what to file the footsteps as. He filed them as a session notation, respondent party departure, time-stamped, unaccompanied by formal closing protocol. He set the stylus down. He looked at the anchor point ledge. The index card was gone. She had taken it. The ledge was bare. He did not know what to file the absence as, either. The Ren Anchorage mess hall, 12 hours after the vote. The mural was the same, still slightly wrong in its blues. Still the too yellow sand. Still the work of someone who had never seen the coastlines and had done their best from photographs, and whose best was very good, just not quite the thing itself. Everyone was there. All 6 of them who were aboard, Ren, Essa, Tacit, Save, and 2 others who had been part of the posting since year 3. They sat in their chairs. The chairs fit them. The holdfast archivists were not back yet. That would take another day of transit. No one was celebrating. There was a quality in the room of people who have been carrying something for a very long time and have set it down, and are not yet sure what their arms are for. Tacit had received a formal protest transmission from the mandate's liaison office, the first communication from the mandate to the Anchorage in the entire 28-year posting. He had not routed it to Ren. He had filed it in the archive. Entry 3,600,001. He told Ren this later that evening. She said, "Good place for it." He did not smile, because Tacit rarely smiled, but his voice, already quiet, went quieter. the way it did when something satisfied him that he did not quite have words for. Pris Vale arrived the following morning. She was 34 years old. She had been in the holdfast for 16 months, which was 2 months past the standard rotation, because the timing of the vote had locked everything in place. She came aboard the Anchorage smelling of the comet's recycled atmosphere, which was different from the Anchorage's drier, with a faint mineral note from the comet's interior rock. She did not know yet. They had not transmitted the result. There had been no reason to. The channel was monitored, and old habits from 28 years of careful silence did not vanish in 12 hours. Tacit told her in the mess hall. He used 6 words. He was not someone who needed more. Pris Vale went to the mural. She stood in front of it for a long time without saying anything. She had grown up hearing about it. Her grandmother had described it in letters. The wrong blues, the too yellow sand, the coastlines that were accurate in the way a record is accurate and still not quite the real thing. She had never seen it before this posting. She had spent 16 months in the Comet with a photograph of the mural taken by a crew member who had since rotated out, because the photograph was the closest thing available. She stood in front of it now and did not say anything. Essa Corvin read the names that evening, all 124 of them, the archivists who had died during the 28-year mission, not in combat because there had been no combat, not in confrontations because the whole point had been to avoid confrontations, in the ordinary ways that people die on long-duration deep postings. Accidents, illness, a pressure seal failure on the holdfast that had taken 2 at once, 6 years into the posting, 3 who had been found by a Mandate patrol vessel in the outer corridor and had not been returned. The Mandate had filed a report describing them as having departed of their own accord. The Ren Archive had the patrol vessel's logs. They were entries 847,203 through 847,291. Essa stood at the head of the mess table and read the names from the wall. The Anchorage had a wall near the entrance to the upper deck, and the names had been added one at a time over 28 years, in different hands, in the same plain font they used for archive headers. 124 names. It took 38 minutes. When she finished, she closed her clipboard. She had never closed it mid-posting. In 22 years aboard the Anchorage, through every session and every setback and every period of waiting, the clipboard had stayed open. More pages added, more annotations, the handwriting getting smaller and smaller to fit the growing record. She set it on the table. She put both hands flat on the cover. Save's plumage dimmed. Then it brightened, slowly, in a long pulse, in and out, like something breathing. The Dravani expression for grief that has been held long enough to finally move. It was the first time Pell, reviewing the mess footage later, had seen it used for anything other than the death of a specific known individual. Save was using it for 124 people, most of whom she had never met, and for the 28 years of work they had made possible, and for the fact that none of them were in the room to hear their names said aloud by someone who knew what the names had cost. 3 months later, the Article 7 review panel issued a preliminary finding. 847 mandate actions were under formal examination. The finding was entered into the convocation record as a pending review item. More would follow. Grand Executor Son resigned his rank brands. He requested that the ceremony be private. No convocation record was made of it. The rank brands were the 11 concentric rings burned into his forearms, one for each species formally absorbed under his administration and his predecessors. The removal ceremony in Krethali tradition was a formal institutional act, not a personal one. It would normally be filed. It was not. It existed in one place. Entry 3,600,412 of the Ren Archive, a mandate internal communication describing the ceremony in administrative terms, captured through a relay that the mandate did not know the Anchorage was monitoring. 3 sentences. Clinical. The kind of language that described the removal of power the way a shipping manifest described the transfer of cargo. Tacit had filed it without comment. Peluveth returned to the convocation nave. On standard day, 7401. The chamber had been cleared and cleaned after the re-examination session. The anchor point was bare. Someone had polished the ledge. There was no mark, no residue, no sign that anything had ever been set there. The overhead lights were off. The seats were empty. The 1,847 orbital positions floated at their assigned altitudes, vacant. The whole enormous space quiet in the particular way of a room that is built for sound and is suddenly without it. He stood at his filing station. He had the biological record of the index card in his memory, the photographic imprint his species made automatically of everything witnessed. The card was there, encoded as it had been since the moment he cataloged it as debris on standard day 7303.86 and assigned it administrative disposal code A7. He had not filed a revised classification. Read it again. The single sentence. The handwriting that had not belonged to Ambassador Ren, older, more deliberate, the pen pressure of someone who wrote by hand as a regular practice rather than an occasional one. Dated 28 years ago. Signed with a name he had looked up in the Convocation Species Registry and found once, in a credential filing from humanity's first formal posting, with a notation at the end. Posting concluded, standard year 7244. Cause, accident. Pressure seal failure, secondary habitat unit, holdfast relay cache. He read it a second time. His secondary eyelids closed. From the outside in, he held them closed for a moment and then opened them, and the empty chamber was still there, and the overhead lights were still off, and the 1,847 seats were still vacant. He read it a third time. The card said, "We are writing this down." He had read it as a record the first time. A statement of intent, clinical, archival. This is what we are doing. He had read it as a fact the second time. The record had been kept. The sentence had been true. 28 years of truth, 3.6 million entries confirmed. The third time he understood it was not a record. It was not a fact. It was a promise. Made by a woman who had died before the vote, to every archivist who came after her, about what they were all going to do together across the years she would not live to see. He had just watched it keep itself. He did not file a revised classification. He stood in the empty chamber for a while, in the quiet, with the overhead lights off, and the seats vacant, and 400 years of witness duty behind him, and one unclassified item in his biological memory that he was, for the first time, not going to file. He kept it.